I'm working as an assistant psychologist on the psilocybin for depression trial at Imperial College in London. But today, I first of all want to say a very big thank you to Cameron and to Breaking Convention for giving me the Science Award and the opportunity to present my research, which was from my master's in psychology. So I'm really, really happy to be able to share it with you and to talk it through. And I'll begin basically with a short background to the study to kind of give a bit of context and an overview of what it's all about. So I guess I'm really interested in the therapeutic potential of ayahuasca. And my research really developed from that, from a desire to really understand how ayahuasca can produce, in the right settings, these very profound psychological and behavioral shifts in people. You know, really to heal very, very deep wounds and to transform trauma to the point that people are living very different lives and really wanting to understand what is happening there. And also kind of alleviating depression and anxiety and addiction, so quite extreme suffering that people are living with. Just actually, I should check at this point. Does anybody here not know what ayahuasca is? Okay, you make my life easy. Thank you. So actually, can I go back on here, Cam? Just that. Okay, so thinking about how is ayahuasca having these very profound psychological and behavioral shifts and supporting people with depression, anxiety, addictions. So we have quite a good basis of pharmacological evidence. Like the other classic psychedelics, ayahuasca works on the 5-HT2A receptor agonist system, so the serotonin system. And so, you know, we're thinking that probably there are effects there on mood and neuroplasticity, which may help to explain. But what about the psychological effects? You know, ayahuasca is an experience which takes people into an acutely altered state of consciousness, which is experienced subjectively. And we know very, very little about what psychological processes might be involved during the experience, and even less so afterwards in the afterglow period. So the afterglow period is the point after the acute pharmacological effects have subsided, so no more visualizations, no more, a return to kind of baseline normal functioning, feeling, perceiving. But these kind of afterglow effects of ayahuasca may last for 2 to 4 weeks, also like with the other classic psychedelics, and possibly even longer. We really know so little about the afterglow period. And in that period, there's kind of an increased positive mood and well-being. So what's that all about as well? So there are possibly, actually, this is just a really quick show of the kind of bloom in research, I guess, with ayahuasca. It's one of the least researched classic psychedelics. And actually, it does have huge therapeutic potential. So we're looking at now kind of studies with borderline traits and emotional regulation and dysregulation supporting that, the treatment of eating disorders, depression, anxiety, addictions, as I mentioned. So I just wanted to highlight that. So as I said, there are likely many psychological changes which are involved in ayahuasca's therapeutic effects. And I considered lots of them, and in the end, I decided to focus on these two, mindfulness and flexibility. And I decided on these really because of how well established they are as constructs within mainstream psychology and mainstream psychological treatments. There's a really large evidence base for both of them within psychology for supporting the same kinds of mental health problems that we're looking at with ayahuasca and seeing that ayahuasca is having a supportive effect on. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a look at mindfulness in more detail. So I would imagine many of us have heard about mindfulness and know a little bit about it. But what is it really, and what does it have to do with ayahuasca? So here I guess, a very simple definition. Mindfulness is a type of contemplative practice, and it's been used in Buddhist traditions for a very, very long time. And it's now also secularized in the West, and as a spiritual endeavor, but also as a psychological treatment. And in its simplest form, I think mindfulness is about cultivating a certain quality of awareness, which is focused on the present moment, and which is about taking a step back from our experience to step away from the content of experience in order to be able to focus on the psychological processes taking place. So within psychology, mindfulness is a specific construct, and it's considered to have 5 different facets. So the first one is observe. So this is about what's going on inside and outside of ourselves. And it's really about just noticing that, being able to notice it, and then also being curious. You know, what is it that I'm noticing? Taking a curiosity to it, and also being open to what is there, open to perceiving. And then describing is about being able to label inner experience. So, for example, when you hear the thought, I just can't do this, I can't do it, instead of believing that thought, there is the ability to identify it as maybe worry or as self-doubt, and then to label it as such. Acting with awareness is exactly as it sounds, actually. It's pretty much what it says on the tin. It's the opposite of being on autopilot. So instead of habitual responding, it's about really having time and space within ourselves to be able to consciously choose how to react, how to respond to situations. And non-judging is a really, really important one. This is often in the small definition of mindfulness. It's about taking a non-evaluative stance towards experience. So I suppose, what does that mean? It means not deciding whether we like or dislike something in our experience, not deciding if we want something in our experience or we don't want it. So if I experience my back is hurting, what I might say is there is pain, instead of being in the experience of the back hurting. There is pain. It's just a little bit further removed. There's no judgment. I don't like the pain. I don't dislike the pain. There just is pain. And then non-reacting is also really, really important. And this is about cultivating equanimity. So this is all about accepting inner experience, being willing to go towards whatever is arising in our experience. Pleasant, unpleasant, negative, positive, whatever it may be, actually being willing to just go towards it and just be with it, not trying to change it in any way. So really, it's a beautiful practice. Actually, one other thing I want to say here is these first 3 facets are kind of considered to be attentional facets. So this is mindfulness training attention, or learning abilities of attention. And the second 2 down here are characterized more as emotional acceptance facets. It's all important for supporting people with mental health problems. But where there are particular emotional difficulties, which are kind of keeping a problem alive and going, this kind of work down here is really important. So, what does mindfulness have to do with ayahuasca? Well, I think we're starting to see a connection. Mindfulness-based interventions have obviously proven clinical efficacy. You know, we've seen that. I'm sure you all know about that. And in fact, now there are also several studies which have suggested that ayahuasca can change mindfulness and can change certain facets of mindfulness. So up until this research that I'm presenting today, there was some evidence showing the non-judge and non-react facets of mindfulness being changed. So you can see those here. And this is the work of the Beckley, which I built my study on. Really, really, really interesting studies. And then this one's come out since, comparing ayahuasca to an 8-week mindfulness training, also a very interesting read. So okay, that's the kind of context for mindfulness. But even if mindfulness is a psychological mechanism involved in the therapeutic effects of ayahuasca, it's very unlikely that it's the only one. There are probably also many more. And I think that's because of the complexity of the mental health problems that ayahuasca is able to seem to have an effect on. They're very complex. So I also think that, well, I decided to look at cognitive flexibility because I also think this is a very promising one. So a bit of a definition of cognitive flexibility. This is about having the ability to shift perspective or approach in order to adapt to change in the environment. Okay, so breaking that down a little bit, response inhibition is really important. And every time you manage to open a packet of biscuits and eat less than 5, you have successfully inhibited your impulse to eat the entire packet because it's full of fat and sugar and it's totally delicious. So that's you know, us constantly, that's our response inhibition system basically, and it's really, really helpful when it comes to cognitive flexibility. So we want to kind of bolster that. And then problem solving. It's really just about being able to conceive of more than one possible solution to a problem. So being able to come at something from multiple angles. And for example, in depression, that becomes very, very difficult. You know, there's an analogy that another researcher, Mendel, uses about a ski slope. And that basically the brain pathways becoming like deep grooves in snow as you go down. It becomes impossible almost to see another alternative to a situation that you're in. So you can see this is really supportive for possible problems that people are living with. So also, yeah, this is important, that recently the definition of cognitive flexibility, it's broadened, and it's become in psychology also about mental flexibility, which is a combination of both psychological and behavioural processes. And I think that's really, really important. So I want to give an example of what that is here from my own experience, actually. So very recently, I became stuck in a psychological mindset, which then affected my ability to be effective in my work. So I've been doing sessions with patients as part of the aftercare program of the psilocybin for depression study. And at a certain point, the participants leave the study and they often start to feel a bit lost because psilocybin has really helped them and it's illegal. So it's really difficult to continue with a treatment that has shown hope and promise. And at a certain point in those sessions, I felt stuck. I felt really stuck in the mindset of, wow, this is really sad and this is really painful. And I really lost the ability to think of how to support people beyond just being with them in that pain, which is also valuable. But I felt like I'm stuck. And so in supervision, I brought it up, I talked about it, and what came out of that was somebody suggesting, actually, whilst this is an ending, it's also a new beginning, because it's the beginning of an entirely new way of relating to depression. It's the beginning of a whole journey of self-discovery. And just as I say that, and when I heard that, I could feel, okay, there's movement, you know, I can feel energy freed up, and then my creativity could come back. And then I could have ideas about, wow, okay, there are all these possible ways to seek and to understand and to explore, you know, who we are, what depression is, how it's affecting us. And I think that for me kind of characterizes that kind of mental flexibility. And sometimes we definitely need other people to help us. So this is just to go, to just kind of simplify it a little bit, actually. So rigid thinking is kind of the opposite of flexible thinking. Over here, we've got a sense of mind already being made up, fear of trying new things, and no point in listening to other ideas. And, you know, there are often very good reasons why we get into feeling and thinking like this. And then, sadly, it just keeps us there, and we can't get away from it. So flexible thinking is kind of the opposite. It's keeping an open mind. It's exploring new possibilities, being willing to try them, maybe even, and listening to other people's ideas. So, lots of information about cognitive flexibility, but what does that have to do with ayahuasca? Well, the truth is actually we don't really know. Ours is the first study to look at cognitive flexibility as a possible psychological mechanism which is having therapeutic effects with ayahuasca. And it's also the first study to look at cognitive flexibility in the afterglow period. So really there is just a lot in this area to discover, which is very exciting. We do know some things. What we do know is that other classic psychedelics reduce activity in the default mode network, so when that's deactivated, there's more connectivity across the brain region. So we think this may be involved in cognitive flexibility and increasing it. We know that some studies have found long-term improvements in cognitive flexibility in experienced ayahuasca users, so people who've been drinking for a long time compared to controls. And we also know that higher cognitive flexibility is associated with psychological well-being. Cognitive inflexibility or rigidity is associated with psychopathology. And low cognitive flexibility is a barrier to achieving therapeutic outcomes. I've got references for all of these if anyone wants any more information about any of this, by the way. So, given that kind of, hopefully that gives you a bit of background and context to what the study was all about and where I was coming from. So these were the aims and hypotheses of the study. So we aimed to assess changes in mindfulness and cognitive flexibility over 2 time points, baseline before drinking ayahuasca and 24 hours after drinking ayahuasca. So we predicted, based on the existing research with ayahuasca and mindfulness, that we would see a significant increase in participants' total mindfulness scores and decentering. So decentering is a concept which is just those emotional acceptance facets of mindfulness, so non-judge and non-react. And we used a separate questionnaire for that. So we expected definitely to see some changes there. And then we also were just exploring whether there would be any changes in cognitive flexibility associated with ayahuasca use. Okay, so this is the sample in our study. It was 48 healthy participants who completed both assessment points, both baseline and 24 hours after. 26 were female. The mean age was 39, and predominantly white sample, highly educated to degree level or above, and English was the first language for 75% of the sample. Prior ayahuasca use. So you can see on here that lifetime uses of ayahuasca had a big range. It was from 0 times to 130 times. And there were 6 psychedelic naive participants in the study, so 6 people who'd never drunk ayahuasca before. 1 participant in the sample had last used ayahuasca 2 weeks before, and the rest of the sample hadn't used ayahuasca for 1 month or more. And the reason we captured that information is because we wanted to make sure that we weren't confounding the results. So we wanted to be capturing the afterglow effects in the 24 hours after drinking and not the 2 weeks after a previous ceremony. So yeah, that was the idea. This is the method that we use. So these are all of the measures that we used in the study. The ones in bold are the primary outcome measures. So the 5 facets mindfulness questionnaire, measuring mindfulness, the experiences questionnaire, which is measuring that targeted, focused mindfulness, the decentering aspects, and then the cognitive flexibility scale, which is a psychological measure of cognitive flexibility. And then also to get kind of objective measures, we use 2 neuropsychological tasks, the Stroop and the Wisconsin. So I'm not actually going to present the Stroop results just because of time and that they weren't significant. But this is the Stroop. This is the Stroop task. So basically you have words in the same color, so red in the color red above, and then that's the congruent condition, and in the incongruent condition you have green in the color red, but you still have to select the word and not the color. So it's basically an interference trial because here the color of the word gets in the way of you being able to answer correctly. The Wisconsin picture card sorting task. This is a truly horrific trial. It's horrible. It's horrible to give to people 24 hours after ayahuasca. Yeah, I mean, before is bad enough. So in this, basically, you're asked to match this card here to one of these above, but it doesn't look like it matches. You don't know the rule, and you have to try and work the rule out. And you do that by telling you whether you're right or wrong. So it could match by type of shape, it could match by colour to the first one, or it could match by number of shapes. And you have to work that rule out. So it's really challenging. And faster reaction times and more correct answers indicate better performance on this task. And this one's really good also because we could change the order of the trials, which meant we were reducing the practice effect. So we analysed the data with an ANCOVA on all of the outcome measures and a 2x2 ANCOVA on the Stroop. And we were in both of those analyses, we were introducing prior use of ayahuasca as a covariate, just to control for the range of experience in the study and to see actually also, are there any differences between experienced and inexperienced drinkers. So these are the results. You can see here the ones with asterisks were significant. So the overall mindfulness scores did improve and increase significantly as we expected. 4 of the 5 facets changed: observe, describe, act with awareness, and non-react. Stroop was not significant. And the experiences questionnaire, so the decentering measure was significant, the cognitive flexibility scale was also significant, and the Wisconsin picture card sorting task, correct responses were also significantly improved. So there was small changes, but quite a degree of improvement across all of the measures. So these are just some graphs to show you that total scores and decentering were improved. And what we found was that whether a participant was psychedelic naïve or they had used ayahuasca 300 times, the most times in this study, mindfulness increased in the afterglow period for everybody. So it didn't seem to be affected by prior experience. A lot more research would need to be done on that, I think. But what that does suggest, it's interesting because it suggests that significant gains in mindfulness can be made after just a small number of uses. So clinically, that's really important because it means somebody could come for one session and already there are improvements in mindfulness potentially and improvements in cognitive flexibility. So if you start to think about targeting treatments, and if you think about how hard it is to increase cognitive flexibility and how hard it is to train mindfulness for somebody, actually this could be a really supportive experience to have alongside and could really accelerate treatment and outcomes. Yeah, so again, just showing here the 5 facets. So, and what's interesting about this is that in this study, we're seeing that both the attentional facets and the emotional acceptance facets are being affected. Cognitive flexibility, the subjective self-report scale was improved. So that's essentially saying that participants rated themselves as better able to find alternative solutions to their problems, to be more effective at problem solving and being more creative with solutions than they had rated themselves previously to ayahuasca. And the Wisconsin picture card sorting task. So reaction time wasn't affected, but mean correct answers was. So they improved across time. They were, which I find really remarkable because probably they were also maybe sleep deprived or, exhausted after an emotional battering all night. So yeah, interesting. So what can we conclude from this? And on all of that, prior experience didn't have any significant effect. We didn't find any effect on that. So the present study provides further evidence of ayahuasca's capacity to enhance mindfulness abilities. And it supports the theory that it could be a psychological mechanism. So the findings that ayahuasca increases cognitive flexibility in the afterglow period are preliminary, but it suggests that it's worthy of further exploration. Overall, thinking clinically about this, the findings suggest that used safely in combination with psychotherapy, it may be able to help patients increase mindfulness and flexible thinking, as I was saying. Mindfulness training is very difficult, it takes a long time, and this could support people to develop, to cultivate those qualities of awareness and flexibility that we know are so supportive to psychological well-being. And I think what it might also offer is hope for a life that is fulfilling and that can go beyond recovery. And I think I can't really extrapolate that from these results, but there's a possibility if we know more about how mindfulness and flexibility functions in the ayahuasca experience and across time after the ayahuasca experience. So, yeah, further research is needed. We need more ayahuasca researchers. We need more people doing ayahuasca research and looking into the possibilities. So I would like to just end with some gratitude. So I would like to say thank you to all of the participants, space holders, and the medicine that was obviously all a part of the study. To my wonderful and very kind, supportive patient, mentor, and supervisor, Kirsty Saw, Dr. Kirsty Saw, who can't be here today. Breaking convention, thank you. And to my husband, Team Imperial, for putting up with me. And thank you all for coming.